This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Robinson, and with my friend, compadre, cosmic collaborator,
Brian Tom O'Connor. Wow, that intro makes me sound so important.
Well, you are. Not many people explore consciousness. And of course, we both believe that that's the future of human evolution and perhaps being able to survive on this planet. And along those lines, I thought today we would explore the future of transformation and how that might look in terms of our very technologically focused age. And as often happens, one of us knows what we're doing and the other one doesn't. In this case, I know a lot about this subject. It's been close to my heart for really about 30 years. And we'll have your curiosity representing all the people out there who are thinking, what the hell is he talking about? So ends up next month, I'll be doing a talk called The Future of Transformational Technologies to a group of well-known authors. And this is a little bit appetizer about that. When thinking about this, we have to realize that things like the consciousness of humans through meditation and religion and such tends to be a very, very slow process. You know, we try to give our listeners the best techniques, the best ideas that we've come across, and the best teachers that we've come across in non-duality awakening. But it's generally, for most people, a slow process. And the good news is that technology is a exponential process. It's on a totally different timeline. Things like AI now are getting like twice as smart every 6 months. So my hope for a long time has been that certain technologies will help with consciousness. And in general, in the past, I've been disappointed. But really, just in the last year or two, I've seen a lot of progress in this area. And I want to go into some details about that. So that's a mouthful. Any thoughts or questions before we dive in, Brian?
Well, I don't have any questions because, as you said, I don't know anything about this topic. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I tend to gravitate towards the old self-inquiry methods, but I am all ears if you have something that will speed along our progress towards our awakening to greater happiness and joy in life.
Yeah. And we have to say that so far the results have been pretty bad. There's a lot of things out there that have come out recently, but not many people know about them. But the things that are most helpful, which I'll go into depth about, are really new, like generally in the last year or two. And it takes a while for them to reach people. Science fiction writer William Gibson said, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Good quote.
Yeah. So I'll first give a very brief review of my history with this subject. Many, many years ago, like 40 years ago, I read a book called Mega Brain, which was about how different gadgets and ideas could accelerate human consciousness. And I became part of a group of friends with a guy named Terry Patton, who had a catalog of some of these gadgets and such called Tools for Exploration. But Terry, even though he was the president of the company, said, there's nothing that good out there. And you might be aware that there were things in previous decades like flashing lights, goggles, and things like binaural beats. Robert Monroe had something called HemiSync. And these were recordings of sounds that could alter your brain waves. All of these weren't bad, and they did help a lot of people meditate, but they were of limited use. As with most things, some people found them really helpful. Some people found them to be worthless. This eventually led me to write a book in 2016 that was revised in 2019 called The Technology of Joy, the 101 Best Apps, Gadgets, Tools, and Supplements for Finding More Delight in Life. So I created my 101 favorites. Shows you I've been in this field for a while. And, there were a few that I thought were really good, and most I thought were like, some people like them, some not. Some were very expensive, some cost $1. If you're interested in knowing the state of the art from 6 years ago, you can get my book, Technology of Joy. But as I will say, it is somewhat pretty outdated at this point because technology goes very quickly. So I think the future of transformation involves 5 key areas. Some, Brian, you'll know about, and some our listeners will know about, and some they really won't. I'll just mention the 5 areas. One is psychedelics. We've talked about that here. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The area of nootropics, which are basically supplements to turbocharge your brain. One nootropic you're probably quite familiar with, it's called caffeine. Have you heard of that one?
I think I've heard of it, and I think I've actually tried it.
Yeah. It's really, really great until your body gets used to it.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, I didn't drink coffee for 60 years. And then for some reason at 60 years old, I decided to have a cup of coffee. And I went, wow, this is incredible. Like somebody turned on the lights. Well, that lasted for about, 3 months. And then my body got used to 1 cup of coffee. So I went to 2 cups. But what happens is with any nootropic or really a lot of drugs, your body gets used to it. So it's important to find new ones so that you're not tolerating and getting less effect. Do you currently drink coffee, Brian?
I drink it sometimes. I don't drink it every day. I used to drink a lot of it, and I don't drink it every day, which is very nice because then when I do drink it,
Yeah,
it really does pack a punch, and I enjoy it a lot.
right. It really can be good if you don't drink it very often. So nootropics, we'll talk about a few specific ones that I think are pretty amazing. And the advantage of that is, consciousness is not just energy. There's different elements to it. You can alter your state that can sometimes help experience non-duality or awakening type experiences, as with psychedelics. But just being really alert and feeling good can often help you be able to use certain techniques that we talk about here and can actually help you feel more awake, alive, and present. So that's how nootropics can be useful. Another area which I'm quite familiar with are gadgets. I'm kind of a gadget junkie. I have probably 40 of these. 37 of them I don't use because they're not that helpful. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I have found things that, like, yeah, I'll use that. It's convenient enough. This thing right here is called a Zendo, and it's like a headband that you wear, and it does what's called transcranial direct current stimulation. And studies show that this kind of helps people focus better, helps calm the mind a bit. It's not great, but it's like $100. So, what the hell? And there's studies that show that really does help people have a sharper memory and more presence. So that's an example. It used to be those were $500. Now they're $100. You can probably go to zendo.com or wherever they sell that. And I also have what's called a photobiomodulation helmet. It basically looks like a bicycle helmet, but it puts in infrared light energy into your brain, which increases the mitochondria in your brain. And it's very good for people who are starting to have cognitive decline. The research is really good, but more important than that for me is it helps meditate you. And I would describe it like that. It meditates you. There are programs for meditation. And my friend Sanjay is a leader in this field. We've had him on before. And you could go to neuromatrix.health to learn more about that and even read research about it. What I like about it is I can even do email with the helmet on, but when I meditate with it on, it deepens my meditation for sure and keeps me very alert, awake, and focused. And the downside is it costs about $3,500.
Ouch.
Yeah. But if you're trying to avoid cognitive decline. You want your brain to be as healthy as possible. And it has the benefit that it helps meditate you, and you got money. That's not a bad thing. Prices will probably go down at some point. But another form of gadgets, while I'm going into gadgets, is virtual reality, which is becoming very price okay, declined. And now there's a lot of VR therapy that's happening, like when people have phobias or trauma, that you can put on a VR headset and there's different therapeutic protocols that might be useful. But I do know that there are VR psychedelic trips now. And all these things, they work for some people, they don't work for most people, and yet they are getting better. The VR headsets from 2 years ago, I thought were pretty bad. The latest ones, I think, are pretty good. And probably 2 years from now, they'll be pretty great. And then being able to give people an experience of what it's like to be fully present, fully connected to your environment, those will be things that will happen in VR. And that might be interesting. But probably more interesting than that is neurofeedback. Have you heard neurofeedback?
Yes, I have.
There's programs like 40 Years of Zen and other neurofeedback type of companies that hook up stuff to your brain, like a skull cap, and they try to train your brain into various beneficial EEG waves. There's alpha, beta, theta, and delta, and also something called gamma. And research has shown that gamma waves are a very common experience for very proficient meditators, like the people who've meditated hours a day for 40 years. Well, it ends up there's a shortcut. And that's why one of these places called 40 Years of Zen is in 5 days, they try to tell you how to mimic those brain waves. And in fact, I've been trained in this and had my brain waves looked at. And luckily now I do have a lot of gamma in my brain waves. And there's something called the awakened brainwave state, in which you try to get a certain type of brainwave. And when you do, it correlates with feelings of deep peace and bliss. Have you ever had your brainwaves tested, Brian?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, some doctors do it now. It's called quantitative EEG, and it can be very interesting. The neurofeedback is often more expensive. You go to a specialist, they hook you up, and there's some places like we interviewed Dr. Drew and Dr. Amy on a previous episode, if you remember that.
Yes.
And they do a lot of that advanced neurofeedback. And when this gets even less expensive and even more helpful, I think it's going to be a common thing, because once you can learn how to reach certain beneficial brainwave states, it's easier to find peace and easier to find even a sense of oneness with your environment.
That does sound promising.
Yeah, yeah. And once again, these machines used to cost $50,000 now. Now you get a good machine for $5,000. Probably in 3 years, it'll be $995. There is a couple of machines that I bought, of course, that were about $1,300. One was called Sense.ai, SENS.ai. That was pretty good, but a little bit hard to calibrate, and I just didn't find it convenient. Basically, if something takes more than a minute to put on, I'm too lazy to actually do it most days. You think of it like, why do people watch TV? Well, you move your thumb a quarter of an inch and you got, 500 channels. So we need these things to become much more convenient and easy to use. There's also, you may have heard of the Muse. Have you heard of the Muse?
No.
The Muse is like a headband thing, but it's a EEG machine and reasonably priced. I think about $500. It's called the Muse, and it will give you signals as to when your brain waves are moving in a beneficial direction. It's particularly useful for people who don't have a bunch of meditation experience. because it only really tracks beginning meditators well. Advanced meditators, it doesn't really, it doesn't understand gamma waves or anything, but it keeps getting better. I had one 4 years ago and I thought it was a piece of crap. I tried one recently. I go, oh, that's not bad. If I was a beginning meditator and wanted one gadget that really could serve me a lot of functions, it's now quite good if you have about $500. It can help with focus. It can help with ADHD. It can help with quieting your mind. That's something that, as I said, this is on exponential growth curve. So what the Muse will be in 2 years, it could be something that you and I say, wow, that brought me to instant bliss in 90 seconds. That starts to become very, very useful. So those are some of the things in the gadget category. But you and I have talked about various techniques. And, a lot of people use techniques from 2,000 years ago. These are the same people who wouldn't dare use a computer from a dozen years ago.
Right.
And I have a bias here. I think a lot of the techniques from 2,000 years ago don't work very well in today's world. Now, as we all know, different things work for different people at different times. So that's not a blanket statement. But we've just from your book, Adventures in Awareness and Awareness Games, you offer probably 80 techniques or something. And most of them people don't know. And I think that they're really good because a lot of them, with practice, they can alter your state in 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how this podcast got started. I read your book and I said, wow, these are much better than, just following your breath or whatever. So, and I have a lot of those techniques in my book, The Enlightenment Project. I forgot the name of my book there. That's embarrassing. I have another book coming out soon, so you know how it is.
Well, when you have so many books, it's easy to see how you get them mixed up.
Yeah. There'll be my 16th, and I'll let people know when it comes out. It'll be called Ecstasy for Couples. Actually, by the time people listen to this, it might already be out. So there's better and better techniques. And, we've interviewed Jeffrey Martin of the Finder's Course and the 45 Days to Awakening. And although he didn't present new techniques, most of the techniques they present in that are not new, but they're not well known. And a lot of people have benefited from those courses. And a couple of those techniques are new, like dyad awakening and things like that. They are literally only like 5-6 years old.
Yes, and the other advantage to them is that he only included ones where most people have reported them being beneficial.
Yeah, and that's another aspect of the future of transformation, is that we're able to collect data on these things now, whether it be EEG data or data just from a lot of people saying this really worked, this did not. So, medicine's been able to evolve very quickly because they get data and they know this pill works really well, this pill doesn't, or this surgery works well, this surgery doesn't. We've never been able to do that with various meditation or awakening techniques before. And part of the problem is that takes a fair amount of money to do that type of research. But once you get a lot of people trying stuff and filling out forms, you can get data that show, oh, headless is an amazingly effective technique, for example, the headless way. Well, what's interesting is hardly anybody knows about that technique. First of all, it's only about 40 years old. And second, nobody's figured out a way to make millions of dollars teaching it. So, you have to learn about it. And in fact, you can learn about it for free at headless.org. They have a lot of great stuff on that website. So yeah, new techniques that keep getting better and better. I just took the Journey retreat and they went into techniques that help people learn the Buddhist jhanas and I thought the teaching was great. The techniques were great. And they had something really interesting there. They had an AI chatbot that helped you to do dyad awakening meditation. Basically, you go back and forth with the chatbot to get into awakened states of consciousness.
So a
And
dyad, sorry, so a dyad process is usually done with two people.
exactly.
So how does it
Like,
normally work with live people?
well, it would work like me asking you, what are you most aware of now? And
Hmm.
you'd say whatever you said, and I'd say, can you notice that that is in a larger field of awareness?
I
And
see.
then you like that, and then I'd say, can you fully allow that experience to be here just as it is? And it goes back and forth like that.
So with AI dyad, your partner becomes an AI voice that talks to you.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I found it to be really, really good. And also, it's available 24/7 for free. So that's pretty powerful. They also had a AI meditation teacher that you put into the search bar or the chat bar your experience in meditation. And then it gives you expert advice as to how to make it possibly even better.
Hmm.
And I found its input to be better than any spiritual teacher I'd ever been to. It was more precise, it was more thorough, it was even more tailor made to me. And it's hard to overcome one's bias this way because we say, oh, well, the guru knows. Well, the guru knows his system, but he doesn't necessarily know that much about you and your mind or what has worked for the most amount of people consistently.
Hmm.
Whereas the AI meditation chatbot has thousands of people it has based its suggestions on. So that can be interesting. And now, while some people are triggered with the whole AI thing, I thought I'd go more into that,
Hmm.
which will allow even more triggering for the next thing I'm going to say. And that is, we now have these meta glasses that people sometimes wear. Have you seen those?
I've never seen one in uh, I was going to say in the flesh, but they're not made of flesh. But I've never actually seen one, but I've heard about them, seen pictures of them.
Yeah. Well, they were really crappy about a year ago, and now they're actually pretty decent. And the technology could likely to be like the next platform instead of a phone. People wear glasses, they'll have the everything that's on their phone in the side of their glasses in like space in front of them if they want. So you won't have to take out your phone or any of that stuff. But in a couple of years, it currently has the ability to see your environment. It has a camera facing out, so it kind of knows what's happening in your environment, and to listen to your environment. So it's now collecting data on that. Like, here's one piece of data. What do couples argue about? Or how do communication between couples go bad? So it's collecting all this data because it's listening. And at some point, it will start giving you advice, especially when you ask for it. And we'll eventually see that this advice is really good. And eventually, we will tend to do what it says. Now, people often think, no, that's not going to happen. But I say to them, have you heard of this thing called GPS? And do you use it? We basically have given up our direction focusing and skills to GPS. We're now, most of us are fully surrendered to whatever that GPS thing says. Once it brought me totally wrong into a ridiculous place, but for most of the time, it's 100% accurate and saves us a lot of time and energy. Well, imagine GPS for how you do your relationships, how you do your meditation, how you cook something, how you respond to a person, and how to awaken. Because when we follow our thoughts about what to do when our mate is upset, or when we follow our thoughts about how to live our lives, it doesn't lead to a lot of joy or happiness or presence. True?
Absolutely true.
What if you had a voice in your ear that was 99% accurate at helping your relationships go well?
That would be great. That would really create a lot of ease in the world.
Yeah. And what if you had a little voice in your head that was feeding just in time the exact most effective technique for you to be present in that moment based on some of the great techniques that are now available? That would also be pretty interesting.
It sounds like having a very wise guru on your shoulder whispering in your ear throughout your life.
Exactly. That's what it will be. And
Mhm.
that is the technology currently exists. It's just not evenly distributed and it's not sophisticated enough yet. But in the next year or two, those things will be rolled out in different areas. And then there'll be an app on your phone called the Awakening app. They'll listen and feed guru specific techniques for you throughout your day. That could affect a lot of people because most of us are listening to a anti-guru throughout the day in our head called your thoughts.
That's right. That's a very good way of putting it. And we
Yeah.
listen to these thoughts and we think that they're true. They're practically always aren't. And whether they are or not, they're hardly ever helpful because they're all about how things and yourself and other people in the world should be different, which is the exact opposite direction away from peace and happiness.
Yeah. Basically, we have a 4-year-old in our head whispering to us all the time about what's wrong with the world and them.
Yeah.
That's not the best awakening guru.
Yeah. It's either a 4-year-old or a 70-year-old curmudgeon.
Exactly. So, that will be very interesting when that is available. And in fact, you can now go to Chat GPT or Claude or Grok or whatever and ask for spiritual advice. I don't know if you've done that, Brian, or emotional help with your mental health. And a year ago, it was okay. Now I would say it's better than any therapist,
Wow. That's saying a
or
lot.
not any therapist, better than most therapists.
Hmm.
It's that good and getting better because hey, it's trained on on thousands of therapists anyways, including the best ones, and it keeps getting better based on mistakes it makes. Very quickly it learns. So 20% of Generation Z is now getting mental health help through AI chatbots.
Wow. And what's the research on how effective it is for Generation Z?
Well, it's so new because these things weren't that great a year ago, and now they're quite good, that I'm not aware of a good study on how effective it is. But it's free and it's going to be scalable to the entire planet. Whereas people like you and I, who are much older, we're not using it that much. But I've started to use it as like a personal guru. I made a chat bot just for me. I told Chat GPT, read all my books, read all the books of the Dalai Lama, and read all of Adyashanti's books, and inform your answers to me with that wisdom.
That's very smart.
And I'm still surprised every time I ask it a question how incredibly good it is. It's better than any answer I've had with the many teachers I've connected with. It's
Wow.
really very specific. Of course, what you ask and how you ask, and how you create this chat bot is all makes a difference. But
Mhm.
even the generic ones, where you go into like Chat GPT and say, I want you to be an expert therapist or expert guru giving me this best spiritual advice about how to meditate better, it'll give you a good answer. And of course, as you create these chatbots specifically to you, they learn from you and they get better. Any questions, any reactions, and any of that, Brian?
Well, I have lots of thoughts about this. The first one was way back at the beginning when you were introducing it, and I said that I had no experience with this at all, and I realized that wasn't true.
Uh-huh.
My whole spiritual search, not my entire spiritual search, but a great portion of it started with a gadget. I used to use what was called then Holosync, which
Yeah.
is binaural beats. And binaural beats are something where you have headphones, and in one ear there's one frequency, and in the other ear there's another frequency, and your brain tends to vibrate at the midpoint between those frequencies.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it extremely enjoyable. It felt
Uh-huh.
really, really good until I fell asleep, which was usually what happened most of the time. But the interesting thing about it was that it was on the Holosync website, which had a book review page, that I learned about Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj, the mid 20th century Indian sages who brought self inquiry to the world, to the Western world. And so I started applying self inquiry. I would listen to the Holosync tapes, and I would repeat I, and look for the I and see what is I. And that, I believe, I mean, I have no data on whether that helped my spiritual growth at all, but I think that it did jumpstart it. Eventually, because I fell asleep so often, I stopped using it and just did the self inquiry on my own to
Yeah.
continue. So I'm not a total novice to this.
Uh-huh.
And another thought was that it sounds like these gadgets and techniques and what were the five categories again? There were,
Psychedelics,
uh-huh,
nootropics,
right.
um, call it AI coaching,
Hmm.
gadgets,
Hmm.
and new techniques.
Right. It sounds like they can be broken down into the two wings that we often talk about. One wing is personal development, or how the individual can live better in the world. And that would, things included in that would be more relaxation, or less stress, or ease of dealing with other people in relationships. And that is all to the good. That is all beneficial. And the other wing is something that I'm particularly interested in, and what I consider most helpful in that is not something that teaches how to improve your experience, but turns your attention inward to that which knows all of your experience. Because in my experience, that's where happiness lives, that allowing background of awareness. And so I'm curious, which of all of these that you've talked about would be most beneficial to that end, to turning your attention to your true nature as awareness itself, which is all allowing, all loving, and just joy, peace, and love
Yeah,
persona.
it's a fundamental question, a great question. And I'm going to give a nuanced answer.
Great.
Um, Probably more important than the gadget or the thing, the specific five categories, the AI, the gadgets, the psychedelics, It's the intention you have with it. So take something like psychedelics. Psychedelics can be used just to have a great time. They can be used for helping with trauma. I do a lot of MDMA therapy, obviously. And then they can be used for awakening. So your intention is probably a bigger factor of whether it's for personal development or for awakening than the actual gadget or the actual thing we're talking about. Because all of them can be used for personal development and all of them can be used for awakening, and all of them and different things work for different people. So I know people who use the photobiomodulation helmet just to feel good or to help prevent dementia. And I know people who use it just for awakening and meditation. So that's what I would say is the answer. And some things have crossover. Like, for example, if something helps you to relax deeply, well, yeah, that makes you feel good. But that also really does help if you're trying to awaken. Relaxation is probably one of the things that is going to be in that ingredient list.
Yes, I agree. As a matter of fact, I have the RAA formula, which is
Yeah.
relaxing, allowing, and awareing. And it does seem that just physically relaxing actually feeds the other two, allowing things to be as it is and turning your attention to awareness itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's why it's good that there's a lot of things coming out. And the bad part is that you kind of have to try them out to see what works for you. The same with any technique. We can talk about technique and somebody says, yeah, that was useless, or somebody says that was the most amazing thing ever. So let's briefly talk about psychedelics, because that's popular now. And once again, the intention of how you use that probably is more important than the specifics. But there's a lot of different drugs coming out. There's ketamine. I know people use ketamine to fall asleep. I know people use ketamine to deal with depression. I know people who found it to be the most effective thing for helping them experience non-dual awakening. It's hard to say. Same with LSD, same with psilocybin, same with MDMA, that it really depends how you use it and what your intention is. And the same with nootropics, caffeine being the most popular one. But I've found various nootropics to be helpful for getting into higher states of consciousness. We interviewed Craig Hamilton. He's a friend now, and I once gave him some qualia, which is one of these nootropics, and he said at the time, "Wow, that led to the best meditation I ever had." And I said, "Oh, are you going to start using it?" He said, No, I think it's too much of a crutch."
Yeah, I can see what you mean. I tend towards that point of view, but I'm willing to be wrong.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't know whether that's good or bad for somebody. I don't use qualia, but every now and then I do use some nootropics. If people are interested, one website that I think is pretty good is nootropicdepot.com, NOOTROPIC depot, DEPOT.com. I don't have any financial connection with them. And I have found that a prescription medicine that I take maybe once every 2 months gives me a really powerful experience of awakening, called modafinil. I take like 1/5 the normal dose, and it's like incredible amount of alertness and awakeness that helps me to feel incredibly present.
How do you spell that? Modafinil, is that it?
Yeah, MODAFINIL. I think that's how you spell it. And it's actually a prescription medicine for people who tend to fall asleep during the day.
Oh.
But, and if I take the full amount, I feel like I have to, lift weights for 15 hours straight. So I don't recommend that. I take 1/4 or 1/5 the normal dose just every once in a while, because I don't want it to be a crutch. I don't want my body to get used to it. And in fact, I often write my books. People often ask me, how do you write a book in a week? And I tell them one word, modafinil. You
Aha, the
know,
secret is out.
the secret's out. Yeah. So, we're in a new phase. I'm going to a 6-day Tony Robbins workshop this week. And yesterday, as a matter of fact, a Tony Robbins coach helps you prepare for it. And she put me through a meditation that Tony recommends that I thought was incredible for awakening. And in fact, today, when we do the meditation, I'll be guiding people in that type of meditation. And so, there's always new techniques, there's always new gadgets, there's always new psychedelics, there's always new increasingly smart and flexible AI coaching. And I think this will have a bigger effect on consciousness than anything in the last, few hundred years.
Wow.
Having been in this field for 40 years, really, it's been slow. There's a group called Consciousness Hacking, largely in the San Francisco Bay Area, of engineers trying to help create technologies that help people experience higher states of consciousness. And I talked to that group, and there were some serious people. That's where technologies like the gadgets like the Muse came out of, or the Zendo came out of, people trying to figure out ways to help people any way they can, also through apps. People like Locke Kelly have apps that are feeding people techniques, and the people at Institute of Heart Math have apps to help people find inner peace, an app called Inner Balance. So there's a lot in this space, and it tends to increase because two things. One, the technology is getting better, but two, there's money in it.
Well, that does fuel a lot of research and development.
It does. Once we find something that really helps people feel good consistently in a short period of time, well, that's a multi-trillion-dollar thing. The fact that we haven't done that well, but there are people who are making their living selling these gadgets and apps, and I think it's going to be transformative over the next few years.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you say that they used to be bad and they're getting better. And even with techniques or just simple spiritual teaching, it seems to me that over the past few thousand years, it's just simply getting better. People are using better metaphors. People are talking about it more clearly than ever before. If you go back to the originators of the main religions, there is the original spark of what's the word, mysticism
Mm-hmm.
in all of it, but the language wasn't clear enough. And it seems to me it's getting clearer all the time. And so that can be applied to these techniques and gadgets. It sounds to me like what you've described, the most promising are the biofeedback and the AI stuff. But I'm curious, how would you rate the ones that have made the biggest progress in, say, the past year and are the most promising?
Well, with the caveat that different things work for different people at different times, I would say that neurofeedback is becoming much more promising quickly. And also the AI coaching, I think will both be part of a lot of people's lives in the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there could be a surprise here as well. So, that's just, psychedelics made a big difference in the 60s, and then they kind of disappeared, and now they're doing a kind of a renaissance where people are starting to use them a little bit more intentionally better. But we've kind of seen that has like a ceiling to it. I think the microdosing is a new element where people, instead of taking a 10-hour trip, are like, what would it be like to have a normal day with a little bit of LSD. And I've found that that has been useful for me in terms of, wow, this is what a normal day with me being a little bit more awake would be like.
Mm.
My wife generally knows when I'm microdosing, which is I don't do it very often, but she says, yeah, you're a little bit more heart oriented, a little bit more present, like that.
Hmm. Sounds interesting. I've never tried it. As a matter of fact, I haven't done any psychedelics since my college days. And what you said about intention rings true, because in those days, my only intention for taking them was to sit around and laugh with my friends and listen to
Yeah.
fireside theater and psychedelic music. And if I were to do it now, my intention would be entirely different.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
would be to directly experience the oneness of all things, although I think that can be experienced without psychedelics. But if it helps, why not?
Yeah, and there's nuance to all these things. So you can take psychedelics to, melt into the universe. Or as I said, you can take a 1/15th the normal dose, go about your day and notice, oh, normally I'd be hurrying here and I don't need to. Or normally I would be triggered here. And I see that that's just like something from my past. So it can help you see both the obstacles and what it would look like if you were in a slightly higher state of consciousness. So all of
Mm-hmm.
these have their uses. And because there hasn't been a lot of money involved, nobody's getting rich on psychedelics, nobody's getting rich on even AI coaching. So it's more like you have to research them and look for them right now and figure out how they could be potentially useful to you or not.
Right. And I imagine another problem with all of this is that when you talk about something like spiritual awakening, it's extremely hard to define. And in scientific terms, it's not necessarily repeatable. And it relies on self reporting, although
Mhm.
now with measuring brain waves, that may change. However, I'm skeptical that that's all there is to it. That if we measure that people have the right brain waves, that I don't know if there's a one-to-one
Mhm.
correspondence between the brain and spiritual awakening, because just in my view and experience, the brain is simply something that appears in universal consciousness, as
Mhm.
opposed to something that creates consciousness, in which something in which consciousness resides. So that makes it, I believe, difficult to study scientifically, but not necessarily impossibly. I think that having optimism about this and going forward and trying, I think is a good thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good attitude. Generally, people fall into one of two categories. The purists that I'm not even going to take a supplement like vitamin D that might, influence me. That's one side of the continuum. And the other side is crazy people like me who have 40 gadgets and have tried everything and might get too involved in and too hopeful in that being the key.
Right.
So I think that it's helpful, like with most things, to be somewhere in the middle. And, the name of our podcast is Awareness Explorers. And being willing to explore, try different things to see what works for you, that really technology is a new force in the world for awakening. Because, for thousands of years, we didn't really have that force. We didn't have psychedelics. Well, we may have had psychedelics, but nobody, except for a few, knew about them. We certainly didn't have gadgets. We didn't have AI. We didn't have neurofeedback, all these things. So
Mhm.
it's a new ingredient. And as with all things, you have to use your discretion. You have to explore. You have to be open minded, and you have to see what effect it has on you.
Yes.
Uh, but it will be an increasing force just because it's subject to the force of exponential growth. And meditation techniques as we've known them are not. They're the same that they were, a lot of them are the same as they were 2,000 years ago.
Hmm. I'm not sure whether I'm in the middle of that spectrum that you described. I'm certainly not at the end of I've got to try everything out there. But I'm not on the end where I won't even take a vitamin supplement or have a cup of coffee when I'm feeling tired. But
Right, right.
I do feel that what I've done is tried a bunch of stuff, and then when I found something that worked for me, stuck with it, which is a good thing, unless of course it stops working, and then
Yeah.
then it wouldn't be, which happens with people. But I'm not going to go into all the techniques that I've tried in the past, although they tended not to be gadgets and substances, they tended to be techniques. But speaking of techniques, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Now, you took the Finder's course, Jeffrey Martin's original course, and I took his later format of it called 45 Days to Awakening. And in 45 Days to Awakening, you learned a whole gamut of techniques and tried them out for a certain
Mm-hmm.
amount of time, and the ones that work best with you stuck. Now, the result of that experiment for me was that what I was already doing before I took the course turned out to be the best for me, but I was real happy to learn them all. So, my question to you is, what format does that exist now? In other words, does 45 Days to Awakening still exist, or how can people try all of these?
Well, the 45 Days to Awakening challenge, I think, is how you would look it up on Google, and it does still exist. They do plan to make it more available with the help of AI to make it either free or cheaper at some point. So that's its future. That, it took a lot of supervision from people before, so they had to charge like, $400 or $500 or whatever it was. But they do plan, Jeffrey does plan to make it more widely available, except supervised by an AI, which is another example of how that can be very useful. And his hope is by making it either much less expensive or cheaper with an AI support network, that more people will be able to participate in it.
I see. Fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. So I did mention that I did a type of meditation yesterday that really I like to give credit where it's due. This is a Tony Robbins type of thing. And it's a unique way of going about knowing how you get into higher states of consciousness. And in this case, I will be asking you certain questions during the meditation. And if you want, you can speak them out loud. In fact, if you want, you can record your answers as you speak them out loud, because the answers to these questions might be useful to you for getting into preferred states of consciousness more easily in the future. So, with that being said, make yourself comfortable and get ready for experiencing something hopefully quite pleasant. You begin by closing your eyes and taking a couple of deep breaths. And I'm going to want you to remember a highly awakened or peaceful or loving state of consciousness that you've experienced. It could be recently or long ago, but some specific time and place where you're in a state of consciousness that you said, yeah, I'd like to spend more time there. That would be great. I'll give you some time to remember a specific experience like that. Remember where you were, and as best you can, exactly what it felt like. And breathe into this experience so that with each breath, the experience, the feeling is more real to you. You can imagine that you have a dial on your hand in which you turn up the dial so that the experience is even louder or more noticeable in your body and mind. And you can take a deep breath, breathing it in even more, letting go of any tension with a sigh as you just completely relax and be enveloped and sink into this experience. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and if you want, you can answer them out loud or not, either way. But just notice as you experience this really wonderful state, what feels different in your body? Do you notice, are you relaxed? Or does some place feel tingly? If so, you can name what that is. And most important, notice how your face feels, your eyes feel, your jaw. And if you notice anything obvious or different than usual, just state it out loud. You might notice that there's a little smile on your face or that your face is completely relaxed, or the tension behind your eyes is gone. Whatever it is, just kind of notice that. And once again, sink into the experience and notice if your breathing is different, and if so, how it might be. You can say that out loud. Notice the primary feeling in your body. How might you describe that feeling? Notice what seems to be your focus now. What's prevalent in your consciousness? What's your focus? If you had to state what you are or who you are at this moment, what would that be? I am, how would you fill in that blank? I am what? Anything else? I am maybe awareness or peaceful or loving. How do you fill in that sentence? I am. Notice if your body does things like wants to stretch or rock or yawn or your head move. Just notice those things as being part of this experience. Are there any certain thoughts that go through your mind? And if so, what language or thoughts do you have about this experience? Once again, breathe in, allow yourself to sink in to this special moment. And ask yourself, what meaning does this state of consciousness have? Is this who you are? Is this something else? What does it mean to be in this state of consciousness? Now allow yourself to slowly become aware of your body. Once again, noticing any shifts that have occurred. And gently become aware of your body on your chair or couch. Aware of yourself in a room. And taking your time, become aware of slowly opening your eyes. And if it might be helpful to take some notes about what you noticed as a way to perhaps give you clues as to how to get back into this experience whenever you choose to do so. And welcome back.
Thank you.
How was that for you, Brian?
I enjoyed it very much. It worked for me. And one thing that I noticed is that it amplified the experience that I was remembering, the base experience.
Yeah.
So that for our listeners, even if you haven't had some incredibly deep mystical awakening experience, you can start with anything where you just felt good or at peace or in a good mood even, because asking these questions or answering these questions that you posed draws attention in a good way. And I found my whole body relaxing. I found my whole sense of myself expanding beyond the confines of the limited body and mind. And so I enjoyed it very much.
Well, that's great to hear. And hopefully the more we're aware of the things, body, mind, physiology, our beliefs, all that contribute to an experience, perhaps the easier it is to get back there and the quicker it is to get back there.
Yes.
And that's my hope. And if this stuff is helpful to you and you want more meditations, more outtakes of our interviews, extra stuff we send to you, articles, please support us on Patreon at any level. Just go to patreon.com/awareness explorers. And hopefully expose people to some new ideas, some new possibilities that will become increasingly important in the years to come.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. Maybe we might revisit this in a year or two to see what advances have been made.
Things are happening that fast. It might be a good idea. Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for being a fellow explorer and allowing me some time to share kind of a hobby of mine for the last bunch of years. That's just starting to become quite exciting and also, I think, quite useful for people.
Well, it shows that when you stick with stuff for a long time, it can start to pay off.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of that, we hope that you keep sticking with us for listening to episodes. We appreciate your support. And as always, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.